Hellpoint. When I first saw screenshots and early gameplay footage of this game, I believe it was roughly near the end of last year. My initial reaction was probably the same as yours is right about now, is that it looked like a more sci-fi inspired variant of Dark Souls. Needless to say, while it does tread on some similar ground, it is very much its own game. When I first saw this game was being published by TinyBuild, I kind of did the tiniest of double takes. I couldn't really believe that the publisher of games like Hello Neighbor and Party Hard would be going into this unexpected direction. Then again, TinyBuild was on the verge of signing a publishing contract for Yandere Simulator, so with that in mind, I suppose they do have the odd trick up their sleeve every now and then. To quote the developer's own words, Hellpoint is a dark and challenging action RPG set in a heavily atmospheric sci-fi universe, where the line between science and occultism is blurred. Once a pinnacle of human achievement, the Irid Novo, I'm not going to try to pronounce that right, space station has fallen. Its ruins are now overcast by cruel, interdimensional beings acting as puppets of the malevolent cosmic gods. You've been created by the author, organically printed on Irid Novo, and sent on a mission to find out the unholy series of events that led to the catastrophic incident known as the Merge. Yeah, I'm just going to pause here and go on a bit of a side tangent. One of the benefits of me being the benevolent dictator presiding over what does and doesn't go into make it into one of my videos, this is one of the problems I see a lot in the sci-fi genre. And one of the reasons I think a lot of sci-fi writers and filmmakers have historically had such a hard time being taken seriously by the majority of people. A lot of sci-fi creators have this really annoying bad habit of info dumping a near endless slew of information at you early into the series or story, making the world kind of overwhelming to a newcomer. Luckily, in this case, you, like me, can just completely disregard most of the seemingly incomprehensible story and just enjoy the game for its gameplay, since that's really what's the main entree on display here. Irid Novo is a massive, interconnected world full of mysteries, hidden passages, and secrets within secrets, all for you to explore in any order you like. More dread and shivers await you as you travel deeper into the darkest corner of this forsaken colony. Yeah, the only dread-inspiring sights that make me shiver in the game are the astounding number of bugs and glitches in this game.
My god, what happened here?
The world is definitely dark, futuristic, and also somehow gothic in many ways, but it certainly never inspires dread within you like how its official description would have you believe. As far as hidden passages and secrets go, the game does feature a fair bit of exploration, although not really in the way you'd initially think. Most of the alternate routes allow you to pick up various collectibles as well as experience points. I know the game calls them cubes or whatever, but as someone who's been playing RPGs off and on since the 90s, back when RuneScape could barely be considered a 3D game, let's just call it what it really is: XP. Dozens of melee and ranged weapons and armor pieces to suit your playstyle. Every weapon has unique special abilities that unlock the more you fight with them. Yep, this is true. There are a fair amount of armor pieces and weapons, yet they, at least the melee and armor pieces, all look so strongly alike you'd be forgiven for thinking that they were all just minor cosmetic alterations of the same basic things. I do like the fact that the game does give you the option to equip a gun. However, I found the gun so dreadfully boring to use, I almost never actually used it in combat, save for when I was trying it out for the first time. A fascinating new sci-fi universe reminiscent of classic sci-fi movies, set in the aftermath of a massive quantum cataclysm, and complete with a deep lore and goosebump-inducing soundtrack. Deep lore, right. Like how this AI early in promises to explain to you the many mysteries of the world, allowing you hardcore RPG fanatics to get really invested in. And he's gone already. Well, so much for that. Yeah, I wouldn't say this game has a ton of lore, because despite several instances where I'm either talking to an NPC or reading text from a computer monitor or on a wall or other surface, the text that you do see rarely does much to provide you with new insight into the world around you, or really do anything much to make the world any more interesting to experience. I've ranted a bit earlier about how sci-fi creators tend to indulge in excessive info dumping, but it gets worse when you info dump at the beginning of your game and do only the bare minimum story-wise throughout the rest of the game. It's a complete and utter contrast. I'd rather be in a game where I'm constantly bombarded with info dumping, or be in a game where there is almost no story and instead relying on gameplay, instead of this weird methodology where you start heavily leaning on one before then doing the complete opposite moving forward. The space station orbits in real time around an ominous black hole that triggers various dynamic events such as boss appearances, horde assaults, as well as modified enemy stats and positions. I'm actually going to give partial credit here because it is cool sometimes to see these large hulking mini-bosses come storming around, towering over the lesser enemy minions. You could walk through the same corridor or open area, and sometimes you'll find certain enemies in slightly different locations. That said, there are a lot of enemies in specific areas, usually stationary, or patrolling in a small back and forth pattern until you engage them in combat, or they happen to see you coming. This enemy placement is definitely not entirely procedural, at least not consistently, but there are a few variations here and there in a seemingly half-hearted attempt to make things at least a little bit more interesting. If you are struggling, ask a friend to press start to join in a local co-op couch session, or call in for assistance online. The entire game can be completed uninterrupted in co-op. The loot is shared, and the experience of 2 local players is saved and not watered down. Well, since I only got 1 copy of the game and not 2, I can't really praise or criticize much here, but I do like the last bit about experience gained not being penalized or otherwise reduced because of the inclusion of a second player. Basically, the developers set it up where if you want to YOLO your way through the single player mode, you can, and alternatively, if you do want someone to play the game with you and thus make the experience a lot more forgiving, at least to a moderate degree, similar to how you do so in Remnant from the Ashes. Great game, by the way. I was a little bit harsh on it when it first came out, but after many improvements and content updates, it's actually a damn good game at this point, so definitely check that out. One thing you might notice in this gameplay is that my character is surprisingly leveled up considering I'm still very early in the game, and there's a good reason for that. Actually, I lied. There isn't. I died once at the hands of the first in-game tutorial boss, and after being reset to the last checkpoint, which was more or less stationed in the literal starting area of the game, I decided to change up my tactics a bit, and instead of approaching the challenge with a Souls-like demeanor and just hurling myself at the enemy again and again until I succeeded, I chose to instead adapt the RPG mentality, the cowardly mentality I suppose, and just farm enemy eliminations until I got enough upgrade points to upgrade my character's various attributes, specifically above all, my health bar, and to a lesser degree my stamina bar. The leveling system in this game is fairly minimalistic, which actually feels fairly appropriate. There seems to be this prevailing popular design philosophy among open world or RPG game developers that the bigger a web of upgrades you have available to the player, and thus the more overall choice you have provided to the player, the more inherent value you add to the game. Yet how many skill trees have we seen where developers add stupid, meaningless options? Almost half, if not more, of the quote-unquote skills are usually just minor upgrades to existing abilities or other minor gameplay mechanics, and do nothing to dynamically shape the flow of gameplay. Here in Hellpoint, there's about 6 or 7 skills, and each of them serve an actual purpose. The only problem I find here is that the developer does a rather poor job of explaining what some of these skills actually do. You have some of the obvious ones like health and stamina, but there's a few other ones that prove a little bit more difficult to explain. Depending on your preferred combative playstyle, it's important to know how to properly tailor your skill upgrades to fit with that approach. For me, I like to dive in and out, dealing close-range, heavy melee weapon damage before ducking out of the way. So the vast majority of my time spent in the game was centered around upgrading the base damage of my melee weapon, upgrading my character strength so as to add a chance for dealing bonus damage, as well as increasing my health and stamina meters, so as to provide me with some endurance during some of the more intense boss fights. In order to get around the world quickly, there is a system of portals that act as checkpoints in the game, very similar to the campfires found in Dark Souls, or the similar crystal-like save points in Remnant. In addition to saving your game automatically, you can access a secondary upgrades menu here, one just as simplistic as the main one, and you can also connect the portal to other portals in previous locations. The ability to permanently connect certain portals is heavily restricted, requiring you to pick up a certain object, oftentimes dropped by bosses, in order to do this. I like this system as, while it may be frustrating to a younger, more casual player, it does heavily infuse a sense of nostalgia in me, reminding me of the days when I was a kid, back in the 90s and early 2000s, where checkpoints were only a rare sight in most games, often requiring you to play through very long sections of a level without any in sight, or you'd even have levels without any in the first place. God, I'm already having Vietnam flashbacks to the many times I'd be trying to beat Venom in that stupid Spider-Man Nintendo 64 level, where he's trying to escape you and then proceeds to taunt you mercilessly when you inevitably lose. Hellpoint for me strikes a nice balance between being moderately challenging and needlessly tedious. It does lean dangerously close to, at times, being more in the tedious direction, but just when you think you've had enough, it shows the slightest hint of mercy, for which I'm grateful. If you play your cards right, between saving at the portals and upgrading your character and chosen weapon at every opportunity, you can really go from being a total wimp and having everything insta-kill you, and you being forced to slowly chip away at their health bit by bit, to eventually becoming a demigod of doom in your own right. Or you can choose to try to charge headfirst into every kind of dangerous situation underleveled with little regard for your own self-preservation, in some kind of attempt to prove your worthiness as an edgy tryhard. The game's fairly flexible nature allows for either course of action to be taken, and I'm not one to say which way one way or the other is inherently wrong. I'll leave that to the inevitable one or two Dark Souls sycophants that will invade the comments section of this video at some point to tell me in no uncertain terms whatsoever how my lack of interest, amounting to total disregard for all things Dark Souls related, somehow makes me an inferior gamer. Because of course, to possess a moderate temperament and thus be indifferent one way or the other to that style of gaming must be because you are not a true gamer. Because of course they're completely unaware of the no true Scotsman fallacy. But I digress. By the next time I went up against the boss, at which point I think I was level 12 or 13, I was able to pretty much dispatch the boss without overmuch difficulty. It probably would have been just faster to just focus only on killing said boss, but I played my way. I imagine some of you who prefer the hardcore Souls-like approach might argue that this is me sucking and I shouldn't play the game if I don't agree to play it by Souls-like rules, but my response is simple. And it's nice that the developer does, by the very nature of the skill tree, allow you to play the game however the hell you want to. If you want to play the hardcore way, or you want to do like me and play a little bit more casually, it is completely up to you, and, I'm all in favor of that. Now, there are a few areas of contention I do have to bring up, starting with the optimization, as well as bug fixing and overall technical competency of the game. I don't know what it is with recent games I reviewed, but there do seem to be an alarming number of games being released with seemingly not enough effort being made in regards to bug fixing and optimization, with Hellpoint being certainly among this guilty party. Hellpoint, as that little clip in my intro can rightly testify, has a tendency to be a somewhat buggy and unoptimized mess at times. I've seen many user reviews voice similar complaints, so I'm relieved to know it's not just me experiencing this. That said, I do think the amount of and said severity of technical issues tends to occasionally be slightly exaggerated by those leaving said reviews. This is not a game we can give a 0 out of 10 for on account of technical jankiness. It's not like the game is so broken that it oftentimes fails to launch in the first place, or alternatively launch, but then proceed to break either on the main menu or just a few minutes into play. Yes, I'm looking at you, Resident Evil 3 Remake. Given that, by all evidence I can find, the developer behind Hellpoint has no prior history of games released, making Hellpoint their first officially released title. So I am a little bit sympathetic to them, especially since in most other areas, Hellpoint is a fairly competent and moderately enjoyable game. In general, I can forgive the occasional bug or optimization issue, but this game does seem to have a lot of both, so just keep that in mind when you're evaluating whether or not you should buy it. It's possible by the time this video goes live, the amount of bugs and the quality of the game's optimization may be fixed in some official capacity. I'm hoping that ends up being the case, but I don't know that for sure. One thing I doubt will be addressed for two primarily alternate reasons, one being potentially that it was the intended design formula, which is possible but still doesn't excuse its inherent flaws, or option B, that it would simply require too much revisionary work to address, is the enemy AI for the minion enemies. At least I call them minions because the game doesn't really go out of its way to make clear to me what most of the minor enemies are called. And if the game is not going to explain itself properly without the aid of an external wiki page, I'm just going to fill in the dots for myself here. What I'm referring to is the in-game common low-health enemies that wander about the map aimlessly. My favorite examples being the generic melee-wielding or mid-range gun-firing zombie enemies you see early on. These guys are so insanely easy to deal with, it's kind of laughable. The combat was so low stakes, I would oftentimes never even bother to dodge or block attacks, because as long as I kept my distance and was consistently able to predict their movement speed and attack speed, I could eliminate them with absurd ease. Their detection radius is usually really inconsistent. I could walk up to a crouching enemy and stand behind them for several seconds before they might possibly become aware of my existence. But on other occasions, it's possible that I could walk into a room 50 feet away and somehow an enemy spots me from around the corner. It doesn't seem to be a sound activated trigger, as in if you make more noise, they're more likely to hear you. Whether you walk or run, the result is generally the same. Combat against these guys, unless you're in a room where there's a large horde of them, thereby actually forcing you to rely on your dodge and block abilities, is usually pretty boring. At one point when I decided to grind through the same zone or two a couple times in order to grind currency to test out a ranged weapon I had picked up, but was not yet leveled up enough in order to equip, I just tapped out and started listening to YouTube videos in the background while I played to keep myself entertained. Overall, my impression of Hellpoint is it's not great. I would hesitate to even necessarily categorize it as good, but it's definitely not a bad game. I don't mean to imply that it is. It just, to me, feels okay. It gets enough right to the point that I don't feel is a waste of my time, but simultaneously it doesn't do enough right where I would classify it as something inherently memorable. Regarding price value, it's priced at $34.99. And the full game length is quoted as being between 32 and 40 hours. Given that the fanbase is currently still kind of small, and thus the pool of available user feedback is yet smaller still, it's kind of hard to pin down an exact estimate. But even if we take the lowest number there is as our placeholder average playthrough length, 32 hours, that's still a very generous amount of content for a $35 price tag. Basically at that point, you're paying about $1 an hour for each hour of gameplay you experience. I've criticized lots of games in the past for pricing high yet offering a limited amount of content. Now I don't think length should be one of the most prominent factors in regards to how you decide to spend your money, aka what games you decide to get, but I do think in general it's worth knowing how much you're getting potentially for your money. Hellpoint is available to buy on Steam and on the Epic Games Store, as well as PS4 and Xbox One. I had a decent time playing it, and if you're into the Souls-like games, odds are you will too. It's definitely a little bit more hardcore than, say, Remnant was, but at the same time it's not quite as difficult to get into as the Souls games themselves were, so it kind of sits in that middle gray point. On that note, I think I'm going to end it there for today, but before I go, thank you to those of you who have helped me cross over 750 subscribers. I feel like a somewhat broken record saying this so frequently nowadays, but I really appreciate all of your support. A year ago, I wouldn't have imagined I'd be hitting this number already. Now let's try to hit 800. I'm still hoping to end the year with over 1,000 subscribers and having this channel monetized. Not that I think YouTube's lackluster CPM is really going to help me out monetarily in the end, but hey, it's a nice goal to have. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. It helps me give this video a small boost, and if you really want to show your support, let me know what you think of this game or this video in the comments down below. As I say in every video, I try to respond to every comment I get on this channel, so if you ever want to talk to me or get my opinion on something, post it down below in the comments section and I'll be sure to take a look. This is WarriorDan signing out. Stay awesome everybody, stay safe, and peace out.